After the founding of Rome by Romulus around the middle of the 8th century BC, the new city was filled with colonists, most of whom were young, unmarried men. As a result, female sexual resources became scarce in ancient Rome. So the Romans began to plunder women from the neighborhood, including the famous rape of the Sabine women. Romulus' wife, Hersilia, was also taken in this incident. A brief history of Valentine's Day is presented in Ideas and Myths by Arno Will. In the chapter, From a Sexy Celebration to an Anniversary of Love, The Truth About Valentine's Day. Among the references.
During the Lupercalia celebration, the names of unmarried women are written on paper and placed in jars. Men choose a woman's name at random from the jar, and the two can be united not only during the festival. Often, the two also become sexual partners for a year, until the following year's festival.
How to allocate scarce resources more efficiently is a key economic problem. Allocation of resources by lottery remains common. An example is the fair allocation of vehicle license plates in large cities by lottery. The fairness here is based on the belief that every citizen has the right to access resources, but the scarcity does not guarantee that everyone will get what they need. Therefore, it is fair to draw lots. However, the lottery does not guarantee that those with higher neediness are more entitled to the resource. In other words, drawing lots to allocate resources is an inefficient allocation of resources. Of course, as far as sexual resources are concerned, it also involves the rights of women. As independent individuals, the rights of humans are a guarantee of human freedom. However, the efficiency of resource allocation involves the speed of development of the society as a whole. Suppose two economies. Economy A pays more attention to the rights of individuals, and Economy B pays more attention to the efficiency of resource allocation. If Economy B is more efficient in resource allocation, it has a leading edge over Economy A. In the evolutionary process from savagery to civilization, any economy with an advantage may use plunder to rapidly accumulate wealth. Economy B can use its economic leadership to destroy or dominate Economy A. Therefore, should individual rights be prioritized, or should the efficient allocation of resources be prioritized? It becomes the decisive question. The former is an ideal society in which man is the end. The latter treats man as a means. Whoever allocates resources more efficiently will gain a leading edge. The battle between the two will be a battle for the survival of human civilization. So, how to choose? Or can ends and means be effectively harmonized? Ronald Harry Coase was born in Willesden, a northwestern suburb of London. Today, Willesden is one of London's new middle-class areas. Coase was born with a leg disability that required him to walk with iron leg orthotics. As a young boy, Coase attended a school for physical defectives, and at the age of 12, he won a scholarship to attend Kilburn Grammar School. After graduation, Coase studied at the University of London as an external student from 1927 to 29. Kilburn Grammar School opened in 1898, but the famous school closed in 1967.
I know thy works. Behold, I have set before thee an open door, and no man can shut it. For thou hast a little strength, and hast kept my word, and hast not denied my name.
Some have modified this phrase to read, when God closes this door, he will open another door for you. I think what it truly means is that God will always open a door for you, but you need to find it yourself. Human choice is uncertain, but the choice itself is dependent on the origin of the decision. When you lose the chance to run on the sports field and win the heart of a young girl, your mind will soar beyond the field to the skies of the world. A year before his graduation, Coase, who had excelled, was awarded the Sir Ernest Cassel Traveling Scholarship. which he used to come to the United States from 1931 to 1932. Occasionality is the greatest freedom God has left to humans. While passing through the University of Chicago, a chance encounter brought him into the classroom of Frank Heinemann Knight, a man who pushed open a window in the darkness of the night, and Coase saw the light coming through. He decided to stay at the University of Chicago for this year. Knight opened God's door, but it was Coase who walked in. Before we get to Coase's contributions, we have to talk about Knight. Knight was one of the founders of the Chicago School of Economics. His students included Milton Friedman, winner of the 1976 Nobel Prize in Economics, George Joseph Stigler, winner of the 1982 Nobel Prize in Economics, and James McGill Buchanan Jr., winner of the 1986 Nobel Prize in Economics. Although Coase was not considered an official student of Knight's, Knight's ideas had a significant impact on Coase. Friedrich August von Hayek was the recipient of the 1974 Nobel Prize in Economics and the 1991 Presidential Medal of Freedom. He assessed Knight as one of the leading figures in the 20th century in preserving and promoting classical liberal thought. Knight made significant contributions to many issues in economic theory and social philosophy. His most famous paper is Risk, Uncertainty, and Profit. Arthur Cecil Pigou was a leading British economist. As a teacher and builder of the Cambridge University School of Economics, he trained and influenced many Cambridge economists and made important contributions to welfare economics as well as business cycle theory. He and Knight famously debated social costs. Knight's ideas on what constitutes a transportation equilibrium influenced the British mathematician and transportation analyst John Glenn Wardrop. Wardrop studied at Downing College, Cambridge, and worked in operations research at British Bomber Command during World War II. Knight's ideas were later further proved by Wardrop and became known as Wardrop's principle.
Suppose that between 2 points there are 2 highways, one of which is broad enough to accommodate without crowding all the traffic which may care to use it, but is poorly graded and surfaced, while the other is a much better road, but narrow and quite limited in capacity. If a large number of trucks operate between the 2 termini and are free to choose either of the 2 routes, they will tend to distribute themselves between the roads in such proportions that the cost per unit of transportation, or effective returns per unit of investment, will be the same for every truck on both routes. As more trucks use the narrower and better road, congestion develops, until at a certain point it becomes equally profitable to use the broader but poorer highway.
After you finish reading this article, you will see that the Coase theorem is almost a different formulation of the same idea, which analysis of transportation equilibrium by Knight. Knight's analysis of social costs profoundly influenced Coase. He analyzed the nature of the firm and the factors that determine its size, and proposed transaction costs to explain this phenomenon. He wrote all this in the paper, The Nature of the Firm. This paper, however, did not get a chance to be published until 6 years later, in 1937. After a year of studying, Coase returned to England to continue his studies and teach. It was not until 1951 that he received his doctorate in economics from the University of London. He then moved to the United States, but retained his British citizenship. George Stigler, the 1982 Nobel Prize winner in economics, never forgot that night in the spring of 1960. As he walked out of the home of Aaron Director, looking at the stars shining in the early hours of the morning, the storm in his mind still could not be stopped. Just now, more than 20 great masters of economics had just finished a mass criticism that had lasted for several hours. A supernova was born. As George Stigler later recalled,
the disharmonies between private and social interests produced by external economies and diseconomies became gospel to the economics profession. When, in 1960, Ronald Coase criticized Pageau's theory rather casually, in the course of a masterly analysis of the Federal Communications Commission's work, Chicago economists could not understand how so fine an economist as Coase could make so obvious a mistake. Since he persisted, we invited Coase to come and give a talk on it. Some 20 economists from the University of Chicago and Ronald Coase assembled one evening at the home of Aaron Director.
The ancient Romans' problem concerning the distribution of sexual resources eventually fell to American fishermen as well. American fishermen need to communicate by radio when they go out to sea to fish. In order to ensure that the contact of different fleets does not interfere with each other, it is necessary to allocate different frequencies of radio resources between different fleets. If there is no effective allocation of frequencies, it will not only result in mutual interference between fleets, but even misuse of frequencies to convey false messages, which will lead to serious consequences. The Federal Communications Commission, FCC, created by the Communications Act of 1934, replaced the former Federal Radio Commission and is responsible for regulating the use of the radio spectrum by all non-federal government agencies, including radio and television broadcasting. The FCC could award or not award licenses based on public interest, convenience, or necessity for interstate communications within the United States, including landline networks, satellite and wireline communications, and all international communications originating in or terminating in the United States. When the FCC allocates spectrum, it examines the allocation based on the order of the applications, and the recipients may not transfer the spectrum resources in private transactions. Coase was concerned about this issue while he was in Chicago. In 1959, he wrote a paper, The Federal Communications Commission. In the paper, he criticized the licensing system for spectrum use and suggested that privatizing the radio spectrum would be a more effective solution to these problems. The paper was presented to Aaron Director, then editor-in-chief of the Journal of Law and Economics, which was published by the University of Chicago Press, first published in 1958, with one issue per year and a circulation of less than 500 copies per issue. Aaron Director and some economists appreciated Coase's different perspective, but felt the need to help Coase correct his mistakes. One evening in the spring of 1960, a group of economics gurus launched a mass critique of Coase. I invite my readers to have some patience and read the partial list of professors who participated in this critique.
Aaron Director, a founding father of law and economics, a professor of law at the University of Chicago, an economist, and one of the key figures of the Chicago School of Economics. He was the brother-in-law of Milton Friedman, another icon of the Chicago School of Economics, and together the two influenced a number of distinguished University of Chicago jurists, including United States Supreme Court Justices Antonin Gregory Scalia, Richard Allen Posner, and others. Aaron Director was closely associated with Friedrich Hayek, and he persuaded the University of Chicago Press to help Hayek publish The Road to Serfdom in September 1944. Aaron Director was appointed to the University of Chicago Law School in 1946. Hayek, who came to the University of Chicago in 1950, was active in helping Aaron Director establish the Law and Society program at the University of Chicago Law School. Milton Friedman was a renowned American economist, professor of economics at the University of Chicago, and a leading figure in the second generation of the Chicago School of Economics. He published Capitalism and Freedom in 1962, advocating minimizing the role of government to ensure the functioning of the free market and the maintenance of political and social freedom. His political philosophy emphasized the virtues of a free market economy and rejected government intervention. His theories became one of the primary economic bases for free willism. He influenced the economic and monetary policies of Ronald Wilson Reagan, as well as many other countries. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1976. He is regarded as one of the most important and influential economists of the 20th century. George Joseph Stigler was born in Seattle, Washington, USA, who was an American economist, historian of economics, and professor at the University of Chicago. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1982. He is considered a member of the Chicago School of Economics, with a position belonging to neoclassical economics. Arnold Karl Harberger was an American economist. The Harberger Triangle, named after him, is widely used in welfare economics. Harberger completed his bachelor's degree in economics at Johns Hopkins University in 1947 and his doctorate in economics at the University of Chicago in 1950. Harberger taught first at Johns Hopkins and then at Chicago, where he became a leading figure in the School of Welfare Economics. Welfare economics is the normative analysis of economic systems. It is the study of what is right and what is wrong in economic operations and how resource allocation affects economic welfare. Reuben A. Kessel received his MBA from the University of Chicago in 1948 and his PhD from the University of Chicago in 1954. Dr. Kessel taught early in his career at the University of Missouri and the University of California, Los Angeles. From 1952 to 1956, he was an economist with the Rand Corporation, where he later served as a research assistant at the National Bureau of Economic Research. He joined the University of Chicago in 1957. He has been a professor of economics at the University of Chicago Business School since 1962. He is the author of The Cyclical Behavior of the Term Structure of Interest Rates. John S. McGee, a key figure of the Chicago School and a major contributor to monopoly theory. H. Greg Lewis, an important figure in labor economics. Born in 1914, Greg Lewis spent most of his adult life at the University of Chicago, from the time he entered college until the age of 61. In 1981, he was named a Distinguished Fellow of the American Economic Association. Upon his death, he was honored by the fledgling Association of Labor Economists. Labor economics is a branch of economics that studies the dynamic process of change in the formation of wage labor in the marketplace. It observes how the interactions between laborers and employers under the employment relationship shape the labor market or job market and affect wages and employment in this market. Lloyd Winn Mintz was born in South Dakota. He moved with his family to Missouri in 1888 and then to Boulder, Colorado in 1901. In 1918, he was transferred to Chicago. In 1919, Mintz entered the University of Chicago as a graduate student and was assigned to teach undergraduate courses there. He completed several graduate courses in economics and was promoted to assistant professor of political economy in 1923. He taught introductory courses in economics until 1928, when he was put in charge of teaching courses in money and banking. He retired as professor emeritus in 1953. Mintz was an advocate of the view that the Federal Reserve System should increase the amount of money between 1929 and 1933. Mintz had a great influence on the development of monetary economics in Chicago, especially on the ideas of Milton Friedman. Martin Bailey, assistant professor at the University of Chicago from 1955 to 1959, and professor at the University of Chicago from 1959 to 1964. He also served on the Federal Open Market Committee. From 1964 to 1967, he was the acting association director of the Economic and Political Research Division of the Institute for Defense Analyses. Martin Bailey has been a professor of economics at the University of Maryland from 1974 to the present. Since 1983, he has been economic advisor to the Undersecretary of the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs of the United States Department of State. The Board of Advisors publishes the journal Money, Credit, and Banking.
After dinner at the home of Aaron Director, the professors began their roundup hunt in the living room. Coase began with a presentation of his ideas. He began by asking whether the government should penalize a factory for producing pollution, such as by charging a tax or a fine. Everyone in the room agreed that the government should intervene, but Coase said, "You're wrong." Thus began the debate, which lasted 2 hours before everyone suddenly realized Coase was right. More importantly, this was the night that a milestone in economics was to be born. Ronald Coase spoke to Clemson University economics professor Thomas W. Hazlitt in 1997 about that famous debate, recalling,
"There were a lot of other points too, but the decisive thing was that this schedule didn't change. They thought if someone was liable, it would be different than if he weren't. This meeting was very grueling for me. I don't know whether you've had a conversation with Milton Friedman, but an argument with Milton Friedman is a pretty strenuous affair. He's very good. He's very fair, but he doesn't let you slip up on anything. You're constantly being pressed. But when at the end of whatever the time was, say an hour, I found I was still standing, I knew I'd won. Because if Milton can't knock you out in a few rounds, you're home."
Milton Friedman was the one who threw the most punches, but also the one who found out Coase was right the fastest. Stigler recorded in his memoirs.
Ronald asked us to assume, for a time, a world without transactions costs. That seemed reasonable because economists are accustomed to deal with simplified models and problems. Ronald asked us to believe that whatever the assignment of legal liability for damages, or whatever assignment of legal rights of ownership, the assignments would have no effect upon the way economic resources would be used. We strongly objected to this heresy. Milton Friedman did most of the talking as usual. He also did much of the thinking as usual. In the course of 2 hours of argument, the vote went from 20 against and 1 for Coase to 21 for Coase. What an exhilarating event! I lamented afterward that we had not the clairvoyance to tape it.
As an Austrian economist, I prefer to think of economics as a common-sense approach to human society. Just as night pushed open the window in the middle of the night, different people saw different things. But Coase was the only one who found the stars that were taken for granted. John S. McGee later recalled, "We just witnessed intellectual history." The results of this debate were crystallized in the problem of social cost, published in 1960 as the first paper in the 3rd issue of the Journal of Law and Economics.
"It is not about my work at all. George Stigler, who was a very nice man, wanted to pay me a compliment, so he invented the Coase theorem. But he named it the Coase theorem instead of the Stigler theorem. He was being nice, but it was unfortunate."
Coase himself did not explicitly summarize a Coase theorem. This is all thanks to George Stigler, who participated in that night of great criticism. His economics textbook, published in 1966, summarized for the first time the piece of starry sky that Coase saw, summarizing what has come to be known as the Coase theorem. Coase theorem, which analyzes the allocation of resources and output within an economic system. The existence of externalities in the case of its economic efficiency may be affected.
The Coase theorem holds that, regardless of the initial allocation of property rights and choice of remedial protection, the market will determine ultimate allocations of legal entitlements based on their relative value to different parties.
Since Coase himself never explicitly summarized such a theorem, there are several versions of the summary of Coase's theory. Sources include the Federal Communications Commission, the problem of social cost, and the nature of the firm. Detailed explanations can be categorized into 3 tiers.
Theorem 1. In the absence of transaction costs, the initial allocation of rights between parties does not matter. Theorem 2. In the presence of transaction costs, the initial allocation of rights may matter, or one initial allocation may be superior to another. Theorem 3. In the presence of transaction costs, some distributions of limited rights may be superior to any that the parties could arrive at themselves through trade.
We return once again to the problem of the allocation of sexual resources among the ancient Romans. If stated in terms of the Coase theorem, as long as we recognize that both males and females have rights to their own sexual resources, sexual property rights, then free love can lead to eventual valid marital unions, whether or not they are allocated by lot at the Lupercalia festival. Of course, as long as the government protects private sexual rights, since there are transaction costs associated with marriage, the lottery will facilitate the allocation of resources and increase the rapid growth of Rome's population much more quickly than a long, slow love affair, and a more precise definition of initial rights through the government will be preferable to correct the initial allocation of rights through transactions between private individuals. We can give a simpler explanation. When property rights are clearly defined and assuming zero transaction costs under a free market, property rights are transferred to the owner who is being utilized to the maximum of its utility.
The efficiency of resource allocation is optimal in a free market with clearly defined and protected property rights when transaction costs are zero.
The Coase theorem addresses the issue of rights and the efficient allocation of resources. It proves that when we respect human beings as the ultimate goal, human rights, i.e. property rights, and the protection of individual rights, are precisely the conditions for the most efficient allocation of resources. An economy B that ignores individual rights and still allocates resources efficiently cannot exist. An economy A that values individual rights is the one that allocates resources most efficiently. Given that in actual society, there is no such thing as zero transaction costs, the Coase theorem seems to leave open the possibility that economy B can beat economy A. A planned economic system that achieves zero transaction costs still seems to be able to overcome a market economy that protects individual rights. It seems that the door is open and humans still don't seem to be able to walk through it. Stephen N.S. Cheung is a Hong Kong-born American economist who follows the new institutional economics approach focusing on transaction costs and property rights. He argues that if transaction costs were truly zero, there would be no market.
Let me now turn to what, in my view, is a serious error in the Coase theorem. I take issue with a key statement he made at the beginning of Section 4 of his 1960 paper when he stated his analysis is based on the pricing system is assumed to work smoothly, that is, costlessly. This is the noted assumption of zero transaction cost and the functioning of the market. However, as pointed out in my work, Will China Go Capitalist? Published in 1982, I wrote that if transaction costs were truly zero, there would be no market. This view is important, and Kenneth Arrow immediately agreed with me when he read it. Coase also agreed with me a little later. However, the full implications of this view took me nearly 25 years to obtain.
Please follow me and subscribe to my channel. We'll explore further in the next chapter rights versus efficiency debate, brought on by the Coase theorem. We're going to discuss it in more depth. How corruption-ridden socialism triumphed over regulatory capitalism